Okay, body image. Why do we leave this till last? Because most of the time it won't work if people are still starved. One of the really key things is body image needs the person to be cognitively flexible and they need to trust you because you're going to watch them do some scary things. That doesn't mean we'll never do anything to do with body image. For example, in session one, I will very often do a really kind of quick and dirty trick that could be very, very powerful. So, for example, looking at the people here, Hannah, if we were doing an online thing, I would be getting you to put down a cup. Obviously, don't do it. You're okay. You're safe. But I'd say to you, stand against the wall, take two bits of blue tack, and put them on the wall at where you think your waist would be, and then turn around, back up between them, and put two more bits where your waist actually is, and then stand back and look at the difference. And the difference is often as much as 50%. You know, I think I'm that big. I'm actually that big. Now, the reason this works really nicely online is the patient can't say you fiddle with it somehow. I used to do it with calibers in person, and people go, "What's the trick? How do you do that?" But online, it's quite a shock to people. I've had patients who, if Hannah, if you were the patient, I've had patients who left those bits of glue tack on the wall just to remind themselves how far out they were. So what you're doing there is very early on, you're getting the person to realize A, you understand that their body image isn't great, and B, you know how important it is. And of course, what you're doing is shocking them. You're really surprising them with, hang on a minute, what? No, that can't be what I look like. That's a really important thing to be able to do. It gets people understanding that you see body image as being an important thing. So what we'll do, it sounds terrible. I call it dangling the carrot. Yes, we have to get to the body image stuff. It will almost certainly be there after we sort out your eating, unlike the um, work on emotional stuff, which might be dealt with by the eating. Almost always, if there's body image issues at the beginning, they're still there later on in therapy. But by about halfway through therapy, I want to be getting to the point where we're actually addressing those directly. And this will vary from person to person. So, for example, it might be that when we're doing this, Izzy, for example, might be someone who checks her body a lot, pinches bits of her skin, looks herself in the mirror, etc. Hannah might be someone who compares herself with other people. Um, Olivia might be somebody who seeks reassurance the whole time. Do I look okay like this? Do I look okay, etc. Rachel might have a thing about, well, that other people are going to be thinking that I look fat, therefore, I must be fat. Um, Esther, on the other hand, might be somebody who believes, I had a really terrible experience when I was young, and that has an impact on the way I look. That the body shame element that comes through. Whereas Emanuela might be somebody who avoids looking at her body completely, which means that actually she never gets any feedback that says, uh, "Yeah, actually, you don't look like you thought you did." And all of you probably need some psychoeducation as well. So what we do is we say, okay, what do we see with the person? We go to the ED15 and we say, okay, which of those characteristics can I see on this measure? So a common one, for example, I was doing some supervision earlier on today, and a common one that I see came up, which is the person believes I must look fat, I never look at my body, and B, other people must think bad things about me. So we talked about, okay, so we'll run a survey with that person to deal with the mind reading, and we'll do mirror exposure to deal with the body size overestimation, the body avoidance. So we pick the techniques that are going to be relevant to that person there. Now, if I were really stuck, if this was session number 8 and everything had taken too long, I would go for mirror exposure because that's the most powerful of the lot, and it will deal with a lot of the other problems as well. So just bear that in mind. But ideally, I'm starting to get going about halfway through therapy, and I'm going to be teaching the person the techniques and then getting to practice outside. That's a broad approach to body image. Any questions about that as an approach? Okay. We know, by the way, there are lots of other ways of addressing body image. But when we do these, we pick out the ones that have got the biggest effect sizes. So, for example, doing things like writing positive things about your body can be good, but the effect size of that is limited. It's quite a bit smaller. So there's various things that you can do which will help with body image. I think a laser in their meta-analysis found 52 separate different types of intervention for body image. A lot of them are useful in prevention work. The ones I want to use here are useful when the eating disorder dug its way into your head. These are the safety behaviours that keep the disorder going when it's really entrenched. So I'm going for the big guns, if you like. So if you find other ones that work and they work well, for heaven's sake, try them out. One thing I will never do is buy the idea that we've got perfect therapy. Perfect therapy would work perfectly for everyone. So the key thing is people get used to adapting this as you go along, finding out what works. And if you can find a link to particular types of patient, that's even better. Okay, so we do this stuff if it's necessary. It generally is. It can normalize occasion. I remember Chris Fairburn talked about this decades ago. It can normalize during therapy, but our experience has been broadly, it's still there by the end of therapy. We do it late because that's when it's likely to work. There have been people like Lorraine Bell tried doing body image work and then the other stuff, and it just was a dismal failure. Worth trying, but still a dismal failure. So we pick out the information what we need to work on from the ED15, also from the way the patient actually just behaves. If the patient turns up and they're dressed in big baggy clothes, you never really see what their body looks like. That's something that should tell you there's a chance that avoidance is going on here. If they sit very carefully and keep an eye on the gap between their thighs as they sit down to make sure it doesn't make contact, think about body checking. There's stuff like that. If they ask you constantly, what do you think about the way I look? Think about reassurance seeking. Think about surveys. So there's stuff the person brings into the room. Of course there is. They're human. They bring it into the room. Bang. We get working on that. This will work equally well for normal weight, obese, overweight people. In fact, the only thing that we recommend is for people who are very underweight, don't start too early unless it's one stick the person. If someone's anorexic, we would never do the mirror exposure work until they were at a healthy weight, for example, just because that's where it's got the best chance of working. And we identify what the maintaining behaviors are. Most of the time, you're not going to get to the cause of the problem, except for the imagery rescripting I mentioned earlier. Why? Because if you're female in particular, you grew up in a culture that says you're wrong unless you're the right size. You don't have a start point to when the world bombards you with all these shitty messages. So our job here is not to help people become suddenly satisfied with their body, because it's pretty unlikely you're going to hit that. I know there's a movement saying if you're not satisfied, you've still got an eating disorder. Most people aren't. I teach undergraduates. I almost always say to them, okay, of the 100 of you out there, stick your hand up if you're satisfied with your body. But almost nobody does. I usually get maybe two in the room, one older person and one male, and that's it. Because we're in a culture that says don't be satisfied with your body. Even if you're really satisfied with it now, the fashion's going to change next week. So don't get cocky or anything. The fact that you're very thin right now doesn't mean that you'll be the right size next week. Esther, go for it.
Do you think that's an intervention in itself, just kind of accepting that lots of people struggle with this and not to pathologize it, make it an issue?
I think that's, as a socio-cultural intervention, that makes a lot of sense for the people who are prescribing it. It doesn't stop the people who've got the problem still feeling crappy. Because I don't mean to sound terrible, but go down to your local high street. How many messages you get bombarded with there that say you're only acceptable if you're this kind of size? And every time there's a kind of, but magazines are now changing the image, etc., they'll change it back again. So the message saying don't let this get you would have to be incredibly powerful because it's up against the whole culture that says, oh no, you've got to be the right size. Even the fact that we virtue signal around the idea of having occasional adverts with, overweight models doesn't mean that we're saying that's normal. It means we're saying, hey, we've got virtue. We'll go back to the thin ones next week. I'm sorry, I sound a bit cynical about society, but I've been around for a while. I think I've earned the chops on that one. I do believe in prevention work around this, but it has to be targeted long before we get to where we are. So something like the Dove Project, the Body Project, etc. I've got lots of time for, but we meet people who are way, way down the rabbit hole, and we need to help them to get out of that rabbit hole. That's my take on it. Sorry, I'm very boring like this. Anyway, this little table here gives an idea about the kind of things that are problems, the kind of problems for maintaining behaviors, like having the hurtful body memories, the body checking, the mind reading, the body avoidance. On the right, the CBT approach that we use. Again, if you want to see them in action, videos all on the website, so you can go dig those out. After this, by the way, I'm going to send you that Mount paper, part of psychoeducation material, and when I've got them, I will send you the video links as well. If there's anything else people need to drop me a line about it. Anyway, back to I can't send you a copy of the manual. I don't have enough of them. You have to buy one yourself if you're desperate. Right. So we're going to be working our way down these and just having a think about each of them in turn. Right. So psychoeducation. We need people to understand how the body works, what the body requires. A number of patients who will say to you, why do I have to have fat on my body? I hate having fat. Why do I have to have any fat? And you need to be able to say, well, have a look at this handout. This will tell you why. Because you might remember them all. You might remember what needed for your neurons, it's needed for your hormones, it's needed for your bones, it's needed for protection, it's needed for insulation, etc. You might remember them. But actually, the thing that the person reads as the homework is always going to have that bit more conviction about it. We also need people to understand that emotion has an impact. So if I ask you to estimate your body size, and I say to you, this is something that's been done a couple of times and it's horribly, horribly effective. If I ask you how big do you think you are, you estimate like that. You'll overestimate, but you'll estimate like that. If I ask you how big you feel you are, it gets bigger. The minute you bring emotion in, body size tends to get bigger. A lot of it is about understanding that it's the way we value the objects that make us see things as bigger. This applies to coins, it applies to cars, all kinds of stuff where this happens. But with the human body, particularly for female, you are trained in many, many cases to believe you're only valuable if your body's okay. Again, my apologies about sounding so cynical socially, but I'm kind of there. We want to correct the body size perception. Do you remember the thing about blue tack or calipers, etc.? We can get people to estimate, and then having seen how far out they are, estimate again, they'll move into a tiny amount and a tiny amount. It can take ages to get accurate. If it's any guide, if you do buy a pair of calipers, you won't be able to buy them from a medical supply store. Where the calipers we use, you actually have to buy them from forestry suppliers. Because our patients make such big guesses, we actually have to have calipers that are designed to measure 10-year-old trees to get the sheer size of overestimation that patients make. That in itself should tell you something about just how seriously people take this stuff. In fact, I think I'm responsible for the only set of calipers of this sort on ice, but they don't really have trees, because that's the only way they could get them. They all come in from Norway. We also talk to our patients about media, and particularly these days, social media. We want lots of cynicism about using social media as anything other than kind of a socialization. We want people away from the images as much as we can, or to be as cynical about the images as we can. There's a few lovely videos out there, I'm aware of the irony, on YouTube. And they may well be on other sites as well. I'm not a social media user, in case you were thinking I might be. But there are a few really helpful videos showing people saying, This is how you manipulate an image to make yourself look even better on TikTok or whatever. And this is this is what you have to do. And they show this magnificent thing of here's somebody with a perfect normal body, and suddenly their whole body is distorted and twisted, etc. And the message at the end of the video is if you see an image that looks like this, it probably started like that. And that's lovely. Really nice. If you realize can't trust everything you see on social media. Sorry to anybody who believes in social media totally. I'm not one of you. The imagery rescripting I talked about, I'm not going to go through this in detail because I've just done it. But here, what we're doing is we're using imagery rescripting, not about, if you like, generalized traumatic experiences leading to binging or vomiting. We're talking about specific experiences people remember that created a lot of body shame. Okay, hurtful memories about the body. This is the one time we say, let's look at the history. Otherwise, we just say, yeah, we're not going to find the history. So it might be teasing, it might be negative comments. So, for example, you go off on your school holidays, you come back and you've hit puberty and nobody else has, and people are just going on and on about the way that you look, or you've gained weight, or you've lost weight. Essentially, the literature out there says you can get teased about almost anything to do with your appearance as you're female, and you'll still end up feeling bad about yourself. You'll be the tallest, the thinnest, the fattest, whatever it might be. You're still going to end up feeling bad about yourself because of that teasing. And so what we do is we try to get the person to come up with a specific example where something like that's happened. My brother bullying me, for example, or the thin kids at school telling me that I look hideous and fat, etc. And then we do what we did just before the break. We use imagery rescripting. We go through one episode where we just get the person to describe the image that's in their head and the thoughts that go with it, and then we rerun it, bringing the adult self in. This is something that Jamie Hennessy and Tracy Wade did in 2018, and it's a really effective technique. Really, really effective. It's 30 minutes in the session, and then 10 minutes of homework each day for a week. I recommend it if you've got somebody who really has this kind of trouble. And if you're not working with eating disorders, but working with young women who've got this kind of really negative body image, etc., it's still very effective. That's where Hennessy and Wade first tried it out. A lot of the techniques I'm going to use don't require you to have an eating disorder, just in case you're thinking, could I use this elsewhere? So the structure of the exercise looks like this. Identify a specific episode. It might be teaching about puberty, teaching about lack of muscle, whatever it might be. And then write or say. We usually go with say. The original was write because it was a piece of part of the experiment. But we get people to talk about this first-hand account. Then to talk about if I were an adult watching that, how would I think the young person was feeling? And then finally, do the first episode again, if you're a young person right now, but bring the adult self in. And we find that really, really helpful. Again, if you've got a copy of the book, it's in there in more detail. But that broadly is a very good way of helping people get away from that body shame. So worth thinking about. Surveys. We've also just this past fortnight finished an experiment where we tried this out, and it did exactly what we thought it was going to do. The first piece of evidence we've ever had on surveys. We've used them for a long while, but we wanted to be able to say that works. Imagine that you're somebody with social appearance anxiety or fear of negative appearance evaluation. I'm anxious about what people think about me, particularly the way I look. The big thing with fear of negative evaluation is you don't ask. In other words, I'm afraid they're going to think I look geeky or horrible or fat, but they'd never tell me. And so what we'll do is treat this as mind reading. I am mind reading. I believe that you'll think I'm a terrible human being, but you're never going to tell me I'm a terrible human being. So my safety behavior is don't ask you. Don't ask. Because if I ask you, you tell me the terrible thing, and then I'd know it was definitely true. So this is something that comes out of CBT for social phobia. It's very effective there, which is where we set up behavioral experiments around actually, let's find out if you're right. So we're testing the patient's beliefs about what other people think is important about them, about their appearance. So in short, we're not asking you what your opinion is of yourself. We're asking you what you think other people's opinion is going to be, because that's the core pathology that maintains here. I'm never going to ask about it. There is a second strand, by the way, of safe behavior, which is try to avoid ever going out. Try to avoid mixing with people. If I have to mix with people, get drunk. Anything to avoid that sense of social scrutiny. And of course, we all know that never going out, avoiding social situations, spending hours on your makeup, getting drunk, they're all great ways of having a lovely evening. Nothing could ever go wrong with those, except that you do fall over, you do feel like an idiot, you do jump into bed with somebody because you're pissed, and you hope they'll like you, and then you feel terrible. Sorry, I know I'm describing your regular Friday out and all that sort of thing, but broadly speaking, we want people to understand actually the other person might just be interested in talking to you. But you're not going to find out unless we can help you to understand. They don't start by thinking, oh my God, look at the way she looks. This does work at higher weights, though when we've got people who are overweight or obese, we'll always talk about what the best approach is, but quite often it turns out to be about stigma. So when we've got people who are very overweight, their concern is not necessarily, they're going to think I'm overweight. They know they're overweight. But their huge concern is they're going to be reaching judgments about me because I'm overweight. So it might be things like they're going to be thinking I should never be allowed to have children. They're going to be thinking I shouldn't be allowed to eat out in cafes. They're going to be thinking I shouldn't be allowed to wear clothes like that because I'm overweight. This works really well for patients in that position, just so you know. So don't deny people access to effective treatment if they could potentially benefit from it. Well, we've got 3 different formats. I'm going to show you what they look like so you've got an idea about the kind of things we'd be doing. Okay. But this is going to be personalized throughout the individual. What do you worry other people are thinking about you? What do you believe they're thinking? So the personal survey, first thing I'm going to show you, am I accurate in my beliefs about what other people think of me? I think they all going to think I look fat, for example. Am I accurate here? And then we get people to compare, for example, when I was a BMI 15, I thought I looked just about passable. Now I'm a BMI of 19, I think people are going to think I look huge. Is that what people are actually thinking? Very often it comes down to no. Actually, when you were BMI 15, we thought you looked emaciated and now you look too skinny. But again, what you're after is confounding the person's belief about what other people are thinking. And then comparisons between people. So let's kick off with an example. This is Jessica, not the same one as in the videos. It's an example of what a personal survey would look like. Okay, this is a former patient. She's given permission for me to do teaching with her stuff, as long as I keep her anonymous. And she's done really well with most of her behaviors. She's eating regularly, BMI of 19.7. She's gained some weight to get there. And her big concern, people are going to look at me and they're just going to think she's fat. And all that involves. So what we do is we start off by getting predictions. We base predictions usually around photos. So we ask the patient to bring in a photo and say, what do you think people are going to say about the woman in that photo? So this is a photo that Jess brought in. You can tell she did it because she put the index numbers on the photo. So now there's perfectionism for you. So a few sample questions. There are others in the book, etc., but you do it around what the patient thinks. We normally ask for 8 questions. And first thing, what's the first thing you notice about Jessica? Now, that's not my question. That's hers. And she's got some very definite ideas about what you're going to say. Second, rate her stomach on a 1 equals flat, 10 equals protruding scale. And then third, anything you like about her appearance. Now, before I show that to other people, I'm going to ask her to tell me what she thinks those other people are going to say. We'll often start off in the clinic. Ira Cooper says don't. I'd say do, because patients like to disbelieve the first time anyway. But we have had clinicians who've collected survey stuff outside Tesco, not far from here, for example. And we've had people who've got the patient to give it to their own friends. I've taken it to teaching. And more recently, we've had people who've been putting it online, which is way beyond my ability. I remember the first time a patient brought in a survey they'd done online without checking with me and said, I've put it onto Facebook. Now, I, of course, know as an older adult that Facebook is a home of all devils, but it turned out it worked really well. Got 5,000 answers and got what they wanted. Just shows me. That was before Zuckerberg went bonkers, obviously. So that's the questions that she wants you guys to answer. So I take a whole bunch of, I would print it out, but other people do it electronically. I know, I'm old-fashioned. Old-fashioned comes being old. That's my way of looking at it. And I'd take a bundle of bits of paper, I'd hand them over to my colleague and say, would you fill one of these in? I mean, Izzy will probably know about this because it probably happens a heck of a lot in your clinic. You just fill them in, can't be bothered. Yeah, it's just another one, etc. And then we look at whether the answers come in. I walk in with a bundle of sheets of paper that I haven't looked at because I don't want to exclude any. Jessica's prediction was they'll rate my stomach 7 or 8 out of 10. I'm 90% certain about that. The answer that comes back, on average, pretty much every time we've ever done this, is 2.5. So already she is going, hang on a minute, what do you mean 2.5? It should be 7 or 8. No, it's 2.5. Nobody's ever gone above a 5, which has always been a complete shock to her. Then the things that she thinks people will notice, you're going to notice a huge backside. Everybody notices the huge backside? Haven't had anyone spot it yet. That you're going to notice her double chin. And at 2:30, you're going to say she's pregnant. Now, I know as you go through this, you do this enough times, you end up thinking, people are weird. People just jump to conclusions about what other people are going to think about them. And they're nowhere near what she thought. Absolutely nowhere near it. But imagine being her. Imagine, I don't go out of my room because I think people are going to be thinking that about me all the time. So what you can really do here is create a huge difference for the person in terms of quality of life. So that's kind of what I'd like to advocate that you end up doing. And we use that feedback to challenge the beliefs for what other people think. Does it work straight away? Does it help? Sometimes you get people going, oh, I didn't realize people thought that about me. They really buy it straight away. A lot of the time people go, no, that can't be right. You get that level of mistrust. It's because those people are being nice. They work in a clinic. They've got to be nice. So he really doesn't know the people I work with. But they have to be nice, etc. You might be right. But that's a crappy thing again. You might be right. Who could we ask instead? And this is where we start saying, okay, let's try that survey out with a bunch of people where you're thinking, no, they'll give me a genuine answer, that group. That's going to be really important. Why are we doing that? Because we want to persuade the person that we absolutely are not telling them what they should think. We're helping them to explore it. We're doing guided discovery. The discovery we want is no bugger's going to say that you look a 9 out of 10 in terms of BMI or weight or whatever. But we have to help them pick the right people. My favorite example ever was a patient called Karen. And she gained quite a bit of weight. She'd come up from BMI of 15. She was now BMI of about 20. She was still kind of tall and thin looking. But she was convinced she'd become this big blob, etc. And we did the intrapersonal survey. What do you think of her in that photo? What do you think in that photo? We did it with the clinicians. They all said she looks way too dangerously skinny in that one. She looks quite thin here. Her prediction had been, you're going to look a bit plump when you've got BMI of 15, you look gross when you've got BMI of 20. So quite a way out. Her immediate reaction, no, they're clinicians. They're paid to be nice. not enough money in the world to make me nice, but to each their own. So, okay, who can we try it with? Okay, we tried it with her friends. So we put together a run load of stuff and we said, go out, ask the same question of your friends. Her friends came back with exactly the same answer. They said, well, that's because they're being nice to me. But what I've done is I've given it to them to give to their friends, people who don't know me. So you'll notice one thing's happened here. She's taken control of the survey, which sounds scary, but actually worked really well. And then the friends of friends who she never met came back with, exactly the same answers. And so she decided, I'm going to give this to the worst human beings alive because they will be honest. Turns out the worst human beings alive are her 16-year-old brother and his friends. Turns out 16-year-old boys are the worst human beings alive. Who would have guessed it? Well, anyone's got a brother, obviously. And when they came back and their answer was exactly the same, that's the point where she went, oh shit, I've got this wrong, haven't I? So there you are. There are uses for 16-year-old boys in this world after all. Just in case you were thinking they should be put away for a while till they grow up. And obviously, if the patient comes back saying, no, those results are wrong, it could be we picked the wrong people to ask. We've got the wrong questions. We've got the wrong photos. Always be Socratic. What do you think we need to do to make it right? It could be correct. What do we need to do? So the patient feels you really are buying into what they're talking about. Of course, what we really want to do is get to behavioral change, that counter-schematic behavior. So the patient I was talking about earlier on, Jessica, the thing she really wanted to do was to go out and watch this band that she wanted to see, and had wanted to see for years, but hadn't been to see because she felt everyone would be looking at her. And she went out, saw the band, and realised when she came back, she hadn't worried one iota what people thought about the way she looked. They were all looking at the band, not at her. That was a really good learning experience for her. Rivka, go for it.
Hi, thank you. I'm just thinking about social media. I'm just thinking if somebody would post a picture like that on social media asking people what they think, I'm not sure that she would get such polite responses. I'm curious what you would do at that point.
Me personally,
with a client.
No, I mean, me personally as a clinician, I would always advise people not to go near it because I don't trust it. Right. I'd probably add in more along the lines of just remember just how brutal it's got out there. But I still have people doing it where they don't ask my permission. Very, very rude of them. And they tend to get much better answers than I was expecting. Actually, what I find the most useful way is getting onto something like SurveyMonkey. You can do a short survey there, it's free, and people tend to find that works fine. Me personally, I wouldn't put it onto Twitter or something, or Facebook, or any of those things. That's how I've run out of knowledge. But I don't trust social media enough yet, even though it worked out the times I have seen it used.
And if a client would send out a questionnaire, people would say, would confirm their beliefs about themselves.
Then I'd start talking about attribution. Okay, so what were you expecting if you send it out on Facebook? Is Facebook is Facebook really the nicest place in the world? If the patient did it without asking me, or did it despite me saying I'm not sure I trust that, then I'd be saying to them, okay, now let's think about why you did that. And it may actually come back to maybe you need to lay off the social media as well for your own sake, because if you're depending on that as your source of reality, you are in trouble. Okay, but again, that's me being a bit cynical.
Fair enough.
It's a very fair question, though, Rivka. Olivia, don't tell me you've got a brilliant social media site that will do all this for you.
I was going to ask, has anyone ever kind of turned to you and tried to survey you as a clinician? Well, what do you think about me, or what do you think about these questions? What would you rate me on, or something like that?
I always say, do you remember when we talked about reassurance seeking? Do you remember when we talked about the way that one of the last things that I can afford to do is to offer you reassurance? Because in your life, I'm the weirdest person there is right now. You don't need my opinion. You need the opinion of people where you're going to care about what they think in a year's time. So, I could say whatever I like. I could say I think both ends of the scale, but it still won't make any difference at all to the kind of people that you think are important. So I skip round it. It's happened about twice in my entire career,
Okay.
but it's usually reassurance seeking.
That's quite good. I thought it would be a lot more than that, actually. I don't know why.
I ask you this question in all humility, Olivia. Would you look at me as somebody where you'd say that person will tell me what I need to know about myself? I'm a 158-year-old man, and I'm talking largely with a young female population. I'm regarded more as, I think, a kind of slightly irritating grandfather figure than somebody where you go to them for information. Think of me as Grandpa Simpson. How about that? Would you ask him for information like that?
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, there are very few things I can't get the Simpsons into, so I'm going to stick with that one for now. Sorry, it sounds ridiculous, but many years ago, I worked with Ulrika Schmidt, and we had a pact between us in the days when The Simpsons was put on once a week on a Friday evening on BBC Two, and we both had a pact. We would finish work and be home in time to watch The Simpsons, and we kept an eye on each other to make sure we weren't overworking. And it's kind of penetrated since then, really.
That's a good idea.
Anyway, back to our point. Is it working? What you'll see will be firstly a level of mistrust, then a shift in the beliefs, then that change in the beliefs themselves. Maybe I got that wrong. And then if we can get the behavioural change, so much the better. Surveys are really, really powerful things. They will get you a lot of good change. And again, I repeat my earlier point. Please don't, if somebody's overweight, don't omit them from this. Okay? We will sometimes use it when the person is underweight, when they're still anorexic, in order to encourage them to realise that people don't think you suddenly look huge and fat. They still think you're very skinny. With overweight people, clinicians often back off. As I say, there's enough implicit prejudice about weight anyway. You don't need to add to it. Just remember to think about it in terms of more like stigma than appearance for a lot of those people. Negotiate it with the individual. This is an intrapersonal survey. This is a former patient of mine, Claire, lovely young woman. And this is where you start seeing overlap with body dysmorphic disorder. Her take was that if we use these two photos, they exemplify something that explains why she's really worried about the way she looks. So she would want to know which of the big question that's in here is going to be in which of these two photos does she look most attractive. Now, I'm going to bet that most of you would say B, because that's what most people say. She's absolutely convinced everyone will say A. And then we get to a secondary question buried in a whole pile of others, so it's not too obvious. And what she's really worried about is her nose. She's really worried that people are going to be thinking her nose looks huge, therefore she only looks acceptable if she dips her head down like that. So if you notice on the right, on the photo on the left, rather, photo A, she's dipping her head away. So you can't see how big her nose is. In the other photo, she's not. And again, in both those, people say, I think she looks more attractive in B, and her nose looks better in B. Again, complete shock to her. And then the third kind of survey, interpersonal. Chloe is one of these three people. She's convinced that A, she's going to look the ugliest, and B, she's going to be the one who clearly has been anorexic in the past. So we ask people to rate all three of them in terms of attractiveness, see if she comes out least attractive. We ask people to just pick A, B, or C for which one's been anorexic in the past, and it comes out completely random. And that, again, is a big shock because she's predicting 90% of people spot that I'm the one who's been anorexic. So again, what we're doing is we're tunneling into people's mind reading and helping them to understand that whole social anxiety, which is focused on appearance, actually isn't necessary. Does that make sense to people? Next up, behavioural experiments. Now, behavioural experiments are the same thing I talked to you about before. There's theory A, there's theory B. Remember that diagram from earlier that looked like a pitchfork? We're back to that. And here we're testing out the established belief, how strong it is, and whether there's an alternative belief that might be more accurate. And we use this particularly for body checking and body comparison. I should probably add reassurance seeking to that. But body checking and body comparison both rely on a belief. And the belief is, if I don't check my body, things will go horribly wrong. I'll gain weight. I won't look okay. If I don't compare my body with other people's, I'll be fatter. In other words, there's a belief that the behavior, safety behavior, is an effective thing. So safety behavior might be looking in mirrors. It might be comparing yourself with other people as you walk down the street. What we want the person to realize is that they're absolutely right in the very short term. That if I check my body by getting on the scales and I learn my body hasn't shot up in weight, then I'll feel calmer for about 2 minutes. And then I'm back on the scales again. Or I'm checking myself in the mirror again. In short, we want people to learn, if I check repeatedly, I'll feel okay in the short term, I'll feel worse in the long term. So the way we set this up is we set it up as a general structure of, for a week or even half a week, use the checking on the comparison behavior as often as you can. So, if it were you, Hannah, I'd say to you, right, what I want you to do this week is to rate how anxious you feel before and after you check, and then rate how anxious you feel at the end of the day. And I want you to check for 3 days against it every time you physically can. Get on the scales, change your clothes, eat your skin, whatever it might be. Do it and notice what happens to your anxiety. And at the end of the week, we look at that compared to 3 days of not doing it. Okay. And what the patient almost always comes back with is, during the moment I was actually checking, I felt much calmer. End of the day, I felt like shit. Sorry to use a technical term there, but I feel like shit because, I'm just constantly focused on what my body looks like. So what we're aiming to do here is get the person to learn body checking is a short-term effective thing, but long-term makes you feel much worse. Does that make sense to people? Oddly enough, one of the most common things we hear is after a few days, the patient comes back saying, you know what? I'm not even going to bother doing the other half because I feel so bad after checking myself. And that's a big shock to them because they've been doing it for years. What they thought was kind of keeping their weight down actually has nothing to do with that. It's also worth noting that this is where some superstitious behaviour can come in. Hannah, go for it. I'll talk about superstitious behaviour.
Sorry, Glenn, you might have said this early on with the weighing. Is this where you would also make sure that weighing is just kept to like once a week when you have your session and not more frequently?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And we'll talk about that in session 1. If the patient repeatedly weighs themselves, we try to break that straight off. In fact, that goes back to the superstitious thinking thing. So that's a neat little bridge there. So what we say to the patient is, if you weigh yourself, you'll feel calmer for a moment. And then 10 minutes later, you're back to weighing yourself again and you're checking yourself. So you get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and you weigh yourself and it's, oh God, I've lost half a pound. That's a relief. You then go back to the scales half an hour later and your weight's still that same weight and you feel brilliant. Then half an hour later, you go back for another dose and now your weight's gone up by half a pound. They haven't eaten anything, haven't drunk anything. What the hell happened? I know I need to do some exercise. So you do some exercise, you go back, and the weight has gone down half a pound. Then half an hour later, it's gone up again. Shit, a short exercise is enough. I'm going to do more. So you do more exercise, and then you get on, your weight's gone up by another half pound. And you go, what the hell's happening here? So you start developing superstitious thinking. I've got to weigh myself at exactly the right time, wearing exactly the same clothes, dressed exactly the same way, acting exactly the same way, etc., etc. And it becomes ritualistic. And you get terrified that not weighing yourself will mean your weight shoots up. What you're not accounting for, as what we said to our patients, is the fact that you got your scales for 20 quid from Argos. They're not going to be reliable. So you're developing superstitious behaviour out of something that's completely random because you don't have enough money to pay for a £400 pair of scales. So we want people to learn weighing yourself time after time is not good, and particularly not all the way through therapy, because we need you to be completely shocked when you weigh in the session. There's no weighing between sessions. Coming back to your point, Hannah. Okay, so I've talked about body checking so far. Why have I not talked about body comparison? Well, body comparison is the same technique, but you've got to allow for a couple of extra points. Yeah. Firstly, we compare naturally. This is something Festinger pointed out with social anxiety. Sorry, that should say 1954. If anyone's that much of a nerd, I'm not sure why it's wrong. So you can't actually stop people comparing. It's like, if you walk down the street, you'll compare whether you plan to or not. What we can do is we can ratchet it up. We can get the person to compare more often. So we don't say compare this, don't compare. We say compare as much as you can versus just comparing normally. And again, if comparing as much as you can means that comparing is a brilliant thing, great, but you'll probably end up feeling much worse. So the other things that we need to bear in mind is we compare for different reasons. So Fetzinger talked about this in terms of we compare against people who we think look or are better than us, they look richer, whatever it might be. We compare it against them because it gives us a target. It gives us something to aim for. We compare it against people who look worse than us because it makes us feel better self-esteem. Sorry, that sounds very mechanical and transactional, but welcome to humanity and all that sort of thing. So what we need to do is get people used to the idea of you can't actually rely on your comparisons, because you're going to think, I'm huge, other people are thin, therefore anyone I look at is going to make me feel better. Unfortunately, once in a blue moon, you will find someone where you compare yourself and you think, hey, I look better than them. And then intermittent reinforcement kicks in, and you more and more comparison, thinking, I'll find another one. It's like the lottery. Once in every 10 years I win, therefore I'm going to put even more investment into it. So what I want you to talk with your patient about is be very careful about using body comparison. And guess what? That's where social media come in. Because if you're on Insta thingy, then the whole point of it is to encourage you to compare yourself against other people. And if you're doing that, it's going to make you feel worse. We used to say switch to a more text-based social system like Twitter. That really worked, didn't it? Really good way of finding something toxic. I'm not sure how many 18-year-olds are on Blue Sky, so I can't really recommend that one too strong. But we do ask people to consider turning down their media use, or even deleting the app. Some people will delete the app. Some people will cut down the amount. Some people just say, no, that's the price I'm going to pay. We have had people delete the app and then reinstall it within minutes because they can't bear to be without it. That says something to me about social media, but I'm not prepared to share it because you might be big fans. So that's the use of behavioral experiments. The last area is exposure. Remember we started with exposure with all that food way back. We've been through it with a bit of the emotional stuff. Now we come back to it. And part of the reason for doing it right at the end is you need the patient to trust you. Because you're going to be making them feel bad here. If there's a very strong chance you'll be making them feel tense, anxious, or even crying. Because this is a scary thing to do. Remember, here what we're talking about is body avoidance. People who cover up their body, people who avoid mirrors, people who won't let other people see your body. Been in a relationship 10 years, the other person never seen you unclothed, that sort of thing. And here what we talk about is the body as a phobic object. I avoid letting other people scrutinize my body in the same way that if I was spider phobic, I wouldn't go anywhere near a spider. I avoid going anywhere near my body. What we're looking at is teaching people, yes, you will feel anxious when you look at your body, but if you look at it for long enough, the anxiety will go down. Remember, we're back here into all of the fight or flight reaction. If I turn on my turn on my camera and look at myself in the video. If I stand in front of a mirror, if I look in the mirror in the changing room, I will feel scared and I'll turn it all off or run away. And what that does, it makes me more scared. What I need you to do is actually just stick with it for 30 or 40 minutes. Now, this can be done online. I prefer doing it in person, but again, when you're working like this with someone, go back to the website. The video we're putting up, which is a full 40 minutes covering this stuff, and it will show you minute by minute what we're doing in terms of mirror exposure. What we're doing is trying to get the person to experience their body without too much judgment, without too much criticism, and to tolerate the anxiety as it goes from high to low. We also want them to do this in between sessions because we want the homework to really reinforce the point. It's back to the whole inhibitory learning thing. I want you to learn this happens elsewhere, not just here in the clinic. Now, the first type of exposure which you use is graded. This doesn't work for much, particularly in a dodgy climate. So right now, if I were thinking, one of you dressed in very baggy clothes, what I want you to do is to try going out in more fitted clothes and watch the anxiety go up and then come down. I could say, do that every day between now and next week, and we'll discuss how it felt. We'll discuss how the anxiety went down, how by the end of the week, you're not feeling too bad about it at all. So we get you to shift to more fitted clothes and out you go, which is absolutely great, except in most British weather, you probably end up with the person freezing to death. That's why graded exposure is much easier in Perth in Australia than it is here. And I've had that conversation with them. They're really lucky over there about this stuff. Right. So that takes us for the quickest route out of feeling shit about your body into flooding. Now, this is one of the two times in my working life I use flooding. One of them is to get the patient onto the scales when they're scared of getting on scales. That's a much easier prospect than this one. Here, we're looking at full-length mirror exposure. So what I do would be I get the patient to stand in front of a mirror and describe their body. And I'll guide them through the description because I want them to do it in a way that is non-prejudicial. So if the patient is saying, well, I've got very fat cheeks, I'm going to say, imagine I'm drawing you and I'm blind. I can't see what you mean. So tell me, how wide are your cheeks in centimeters or palms of your hand? How wide is it? And I'm going to constantly try getting the person to stop talking in a prejudicial way, judgment-based way about their appearance, and get them to do neutral as I can get them. And I'll get them to start at the top of their head and just describe what they see in the mirror going down. And what I also want to do is keep them fixed on the mirror, on them looking at themselves the whole time, and as much of themselves as possible. So I'll have the person in a full-length mirror, standing far enough back they can see their whole body. If I'm doing it online, let's say I was doing it to Hannah, because I can see Hannah at the moment on my screen. Sorry, I'm not just picking on you for the hell of it, Hannah, I promise. But if I were doing Hannah, I would be saying, okay, position your camera so that you can see a wall behind you, and you can stand right back there, and we can see the whole length of your body. I'm not going to ask you to do that now. You're probably not going with furniture. And there's various things you can do, like a pin Hannah's screen to the middle, or I don't ask her to do the same thing, just to get the image as big as I can. And we find that works just as well, which again is one of the big things we learned out of COVID. You don't need a mirror to do mirror exposure. Oddly enough, an awful lot of services do not have mirrors. I can think of several services. I was doing some supervision earlier, as I was telling you. And one of the people said, I couldn't do mirror exposure because the room with the mirror in was in use. One room with a mirror? How many do you have at home? It's probably not just going to be one. Probably more than one there. So I tend to say, have a mirror in every therapy room, because that way, even if they're not looking at the patient, get used to it. Having mirror and scales in the clinic room, some clinicians just say, but the patient will be scared. Yeah, they'll be scared for half an hour, and then they'll be calmer, and then they won't worry about it. But what we do when we withdraw scary things is we say, Now that's going to make it really scary later on. Anyway, back to my point. I've got the patient describing themselves, and as they go from head all the way to feet, every few minutes, I'll say, rate your anxiety on a 0 to 100 scale. So I'll start off with, how's your anxiety? 100, because I'm staring at myself in the mirror and I don't like it. Maybe we'll get them to talk their way through their face, and then I'll say, you got to your neck, how's that anxiety rating? Still 100, thank you very much. And we'll do that going down. They'll pick out bits they don't like, get them to describe them more objectively. And about every 5 minutes, or when you get through a significant chunk of body, rate the anxiety. And trust me, for the first 15 minutes, you're going to feel like the worst human being alive, because you're asking the patient to do something that's deliberately making them anxious. They may cry. I don't see it often, but it does happen. And your job is to go into what I call Milgram mode. If you remember, Milgram was the psychologist who did the experiments about electrocuting other people. And the way of getting people to carry on was just to put on a white coat, carry a clipboard, and say, it's very important for the purpose of the experiment that we continue. And when I've got the patient going, oh, do I have to do this? It's really horrible. I can hear myself going into Milgram mode. It's very important for you to get the maximum benefit of this for you to continue. Yeah, we're not actually electrocuting anyone, but I'm that far away. But by the time they're coming back up their body, they get to their feet, and then we do the same thing, starting with the feet coming up. By the time they're coming back up the body, you start seeing the anxiety come down. And that is the relief in that is so good. And they get back up, and by this time, maybe they're on a 60 or 50 around here, maybe a 50 up here, and you're thinking, should I stop now? To which the answer I'd say is no, get them to do it again. See the anxiety come down more. This will take about 40 minutes, remember. The thing that we do now, and again, it's in the new video, is we ask people, having got all the way from head to toe, toe to head, we then say, let's push it. Your anxiety's come down a bit. How about we push your learning a bit? And we ask the patient to turn sideways on and describe that one. And immediately their anxiety goes back up to an 80. You see, oh my God, I can see bits I couldn't see before. And then you go down and the anxiety starts to fall again. Remember, their capacity to be anxious is going to be very adrenaline driven, but also they're going to be learning. Nothing bad is happening. The final bit, where they've gone down all the way to the feet again, we actually now talk to them about, tell us about the function of your body. What is it? What those bits of your body do? Start with your feet. What do you get from those? What are the good things about them? We get people to talk functionality. And so where they've talked about their calves for sticking out, looking really weird before, now they're saying, well, I probably, I need my calves because I like to walk, and therefore, I need those to be able to get around. And what we find is that brings the anxiety down much quicker. So it's head to toe, toe to head, turn, head to toe, function, toe to head. And that usually brings the anxiety down a lot. And that's brilliant. But you've just done that in their room online, or you've done it in your clinic room. That's not enough. So the next step, take it out. Get out there and do this stuff in the real world. Brilliant. Really. Do it in the real world. You'll feel so much better, etc. So we get, I'll say to patients, I want you to go to the changing rooms at your local shop. Go to the high street or the mall. Check yourself out. Don't buy any clothes. You don't have to buy clothes unless you want to. But check yourself out in every different mirror that you can. Look in shop windows. Turn your camera on when you're online, etc. Anything that gives you that image of what you look like. I had one patient a while ago. His big thing was, you know what, I'm going to do my yoga like this. There is evidence that getting people to dress in swimsuits or leotards is more effective than wearing everyday fitted clothes. Unfortunately, again, being a 194-year-old man, I'm not about to ask my patients to come in a swimming costume, but it can be a good thing for them to do at home. If they get stuck over it, I get them to make a recording and say, let's hear what the problem was. And then often you'll hear they start being very self-critical. Okay, that's the stuff we need to tackle. So we'll try to get this done around session 7, session 8, because it has such a powerful effect. Like I said, if I'm running out of time to do anything else, and if body avoidance is a big thing, I'll do this. you know, my go-to pairing, the social anxiety thing with surveys and this will cover most of what you need, but the others are all useful depending on the person's presentation. Hannah, yes.
Sorry, another question. When you're doing it like in session, if someone does start becoming very critical, would you interrupt them and like rephrase it to make it just like a neutral statement?
Well, I wouldn't rephrase it,
Mm.
but I'd ask them to come up with a way of expressing it that was more kind of understandable. So, like I said, you know, tell me how wide you think your cheekbones are. You just said you got really fat cheeks. How far apart are they? How
Okay.
far are they front to back? And get the person to start thinking objectively about them. Every time that the person then said, "Oh, well, I've got really big backside, etc." How many centimeters across is it, or how many inches, or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Just to try to get them into more objective mode. So I'm not
Okay.
going to tell them off. I'm just going to say that's what people tend to do, and it's really, really tempting. My job is to remind you about this stuff.
Mm-hmm. And you get them to describe it in their body in the first person, like I have my, yeah.
Yeah. We don't want the dissociation describing you as if it were a piece of artwork or whatever.
Yeah.
Is it? Yes. Go ahead.
So, you know, with the ED15, for example, if their scores regarding like the body image sections were quite low, would you still suggest doing a mirror exposure and seeing if actually there is some anxiety there that maybe they initially didn't know they had?
I talk to them about their everyday life first. You know, you tend to dress in very big, bulky clothes, etc., because that will tell you whether there's a big issue in their life.
Mm.
So I don't say to people, "Okay, tell me, you know, let's break you down. You're going to have a problem." If their scores are really low, then I often say, "Then it sounds like you haven't got a problem." But if their scores are low, but their behaviours say there's a problem, then I'll focus in on what the problem might be.
Okay, well,
That
thank you.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I've put in a few bits and pieces of evidence around it, but I think I've covered all of that for you already. Again, just to remind you, the Luthka paper is don't use things like mindfulness, relaxation, etc. during this. It's tempting to because it makes you feel like you're a better clinician, but you just sustain the problem. Just like I talked about earlier on with exposure work. So again, I'm not complaining about relaxation or mindfulness or meditation or anything like that. I'm just saying do things where they will work, not where they'll clash. And then just to wind up really, relapse prevention. So if you've got any final questions, save them up. I'm going to flick through relapse prevention because so much of what we do in the last couple of sections is about making sure that all the stuff we wanted to achieve at the beginning has been hit and is really rammed home. So we usually do this in the second half of the penultimate session, session 9. It is worth remembering about, in Perth, they ran a big study looking at CBT T, and they found the average number of sessions people attended was actually 8. So it may be that a lot of people don't need 10 sessions after all. They still did really well, but the number of sessions varies from person to person. Anyway, let's assume we're in session 9. We're in the second half, we're going to start preparing a thing called the therapy blueprint. If you're familiar with CBT, you'll know what that looks like. If you're not, it's coming up. So our themes for that last couple of sessions and then carried forward into the follow-up. Number 1, remember what I said right at the beginning? Attributing success to the patient. We want self-efficacy for that patient. We want them thinking, I did this. Glenn was here, Glenn helped, maybe not. But I made the changes here. That's a really important thing for the patient to learn. Lots and lots of positive reinforcement about what they've done. It's got to be genuine. It can't just be, oh, you tried so hard. It's got to be, you did such a good job. We review what's gone well. So the patient learns this is the stuff they can carry on. If I hit problems in the future, I know what to come back to. We stress what, remember I said earlier on, it's keyhole therapy, with helping the person get to a point where their symptoms are gone, their quality of life is better, but they've got the freedom to start thinking, who am I going to be? We're not in a therapy that creates a new person. We're in a therapy that opens the door so you can do that yourself. So we don't say to people, right now you go back to university. We say, what are you going to do? And that's usually where they say, go back to university or I change my course or whatever. But then we developed the therapy blueprint, and we differentiate different ways in which things could potentially go wrong. I'll come to that as I go through this. So here are the big headers. This is to remind the person as a memoir for later on when they're in follow-up. What were my problems? Often the patient can't believe how bad they were at the beginning when you look at it. We say, do you remember you were binging 2 times a day when you came here? Was I? It's a real shock to people. You know, they were doing it for 5 years. What was I do to change? Well, that note pronoun, not what was done to me to change. What did I do to change? We want people thinking it was me. What do I still want to make? How am I going to achieve? This is where you start talking about, so what's life going to look like in 5-10 years' time? How are you going to get there? And some patients say, do you know what? I'm 18, I haven't got a bloody clue. Other people say, you know what? There's so many things I've missed out on. I'm going to go for it. We have some people who've had the disorder for 20, 30 years. And after 10 sessions, they're doing really well. And we say to them, what are you going to do? I really missed all things I didn't do. Okay, but given that we don't have a TARDIS, what are you actually going to do? And that becomes quite important to them. Then we talk about setbacks, not because we're expecting them, but what might lead to them. What could go wrong? You had this belief that getting to a particular way would get you the kind of relationship you wanted, or that your boyfriend would still like you. What if he doesn't? What if your parents are still mean to you? What if you don't get the job that you wanted? What would that do to you, and how are you going to avoid that turning to the eating disorder again? And to help with that, what would be the symptoms? What would tell you things are going wrong? This is where we talk about what Henderson and Dolan talk about, which is the notion of the kind of the motivational stages of prelapse, lapse, and relapse. What we talk to with our patients about is everyone wants to avoid relapsing, going back to where they started. How do we do that? We look out for when things change. We look out for when things could go wrong. So the first thing we look out for is a lapse. That's when you change your behavior. So, for example, oh my God, I forgot to eat my evening snack yesterday. Did anything go terribly wrong? No. Well, maybe that says, let's experiment. Maybe I don't need the evening snack. So I could try not having that and see whether I need it or not. Or I didn't do the diary. Okay, do you need to do the diary? Because at some point in your life, you're going to eat normally, which is going to be a bit all over the place. You're going to not keep a diary. So we say treat it as an experiment. 3 days of not doing it. If things go well, you probably don't need the diary. If things go badly, get the bloody diary out. Then we also ask people to look out for what we call a prelapse, or what Myra Cooper calls a permissive cognition. A thought in our head that says, oh, do I have to do a diary? And once you get that thought, again, don't just try to hide from it. Don't just go with it. Just go experiment time. I don't know if I need to keep a diary. So guess what? I'll experiment for a couple of days and not keep a diary. If everything goes well, fine. If it doesn't, I've got to get back on the diary. So we're looking to help people think about conscious change. That's how you look at the overcoming of the setback. How do we stop people from falling all the way down the hill again? And then what do we do if that doesn't work? That's usually, here's the clinic number, give us a call, we'll talk with you about it. But we don't get many calls because we're aiming for the person to get well. And by well, we don't just mean isn't using the symptoms. We mean actually doesn't need any of that anymore. When we do qualitative follow-ups on this, the number of people who say it just feels like a completely different person who had this problem, it doesn't feel like me, is really reassuring. It sounds really weird, but I've always found working with these sort of incredibly rewarding because they're meant to be so difficult. But actually, if you get it right, you get such good benefits. And then final bit, we use the final session to talk about follow-up being an active element of therapy. We go over the blueprint, we go over the reading. We say, okay, are there any things that we need to do? And then we say, what I want you to do between now and the first follow-up is problem solve. If you hit a problem, solve it, come back and tell me how you solved it. Don't just go give way and collapse. Come back and tell me how you did. They're getting people used to the idea of you're here to solve the problems because this is you about to leave therapy. We need you to be good at this stuff. We do write them a letter after session 10. Again, there's a template in there. And we find that's helpful for reinforcing the progress the patient's made. And follow-up. First follow-up is where we allow for slips. We say, has anything gone wrong? If it did, how did you solve it? We don't assume you've collapsed. We assume that you learned from it. And we say it's better to do that now than it is to wait a couple of years and then have a slip. So we're encouraging problem solving. And the final time, lots more positive change reinforcement, lots of attribution, it was you that did it. And if there's anything else, like the person still has PTSD or something, that's when we refer on. We don't want to keep the patient in therapy forever. We want to actually learn, you know what, I got better, rather than think I can't get better without being in therapy. That, broadly speaking, is where we'd end therapy. We have a follow-up at 1 month. We have another follow-up 2 months later. The Tatham one's gone up to 6 months. With anorexia, will go up to a year. That kind of time frame, because we want to be sure that people are out of this stuff. I think the safest way of looking at it is I love my patients dearly, but man alive, I don't want to see them again. I'm really sure they don't want to see me again. So get them to the point where they get to go without being dependent on you. I always work on the basis of it's much better if in 5 years' time, your patient hasn't got a clue who you were, but does remember all the skills they learned in therapy. That's what you're really after. So what I want to close with, before any questions you've got, it's important to be optimistic. Don't give up when you work with eating disorders, because it's way too easy to do that. And too many patients that suffer the result. Aim for recovery. Don't worry about the patient's age. Just go for it. We have, by the way, done this work with adolescents and got good results there as well. I still say start with FBT with that group, but a lot of patients don't want family therapy. And if you're familiar with CBT, hopefully what you've been hearing is this sounds just like anxiety. And none of the tools I've talked about, apart from eating, are different to what you get in the standard CBT armory. Exposure, behavior experiments, surveys, they're all the stuff that we use regularly. Key thing is behavioral change, and that change needs to be as early as it can. Finally, please don't ignore those who are overweight. With surveys, with mirror work, they work just as well for those groups. And so all I can do is encourage you, have a go, see how you get on. And if you find new and exciting techniques, hopefully you'll be writing the next bloody handbook. Okay, that's it from me. Are there any final questions before I let you go home and find the chocolate and the bottle of wine and the packet of popcorn that you so desperately need now? Okay, then what I'll do is I'll wait for the recordings to be available, put them onto YouTube, and then I'll ping all that over to you along with the psychoeducational handouts and that paper on weighing that I promised you. Okay. Hope you have a good weekend, folks. I'm going to turn off the recording now so you can start swearing in just a second. If I can remember how to stop the recording.